Hey everybody, we are back with verb tense part 2 in our verb tense unit. So remember, we talked about the past, the present, and the future. And at this point in your schooling career, you should be very familiar with what past, present, and future mean. But we said we're going to be jumping into simple past, continuous past, past perfect, present simple, present continuous, present perfect, future simple, future continuous, and future perfect. So we already talked about the past simple, where we said I walked. Today we're going to focus in on when to use the past continuous. And our first rule on when to use the past continuous is when you have an action in the past which overlaps with another action or time. So the action in the past continuous starts before and often continues after the other shorter action or time. And we'll look at some examples here. But I just want to go back to this slide here and show you the past continuous was I was walking. So right there, that's what we're focusing on today. So I was leaving the airport when I met John. So remember, we said it was in the past. So you were leaving the airport. I was leaving the airport. And then there's a smaller thing that happens. I met John. Okay, that happens as you're leaving the airport. And then you're still leaving the airport after you met John. So that's like a continuous, past continuous. It's continuing through another event. So leaving the airport is continuing through meeting John. And I was leaving the airport is the past continuous. And the explanation here, I started leaving the airport before I met John, and maybe I continued afterward. Okay, here we go. And I'm going to let you try to figure this one out. At 2 o'clock, I was painting a picture of my cat. So I want to know, what is the past continuous verb tense here? Where is it? Identify it. Okay, you got it. It was painting. And here, we talked about at the airport, you met John. So John had been met and you continued to leave the airport. Here at 2 o'clock, I can't imagine that you painted a picture of your cat within that 1 minute time frame. So what we're saying is you didn't start at 1:59. I guess you were painting at 1:59, and at 2:01 you were still painting. So at 2 o'clock, at that moment of time, you were still painting that picture of your cat. So that's what we mean by past continuous, because it continued on from before and after 2 o'clock. And even if you say, well, I started at 2 o'clock, well, still, it's continuing. It's continuous. It's going beyond 2 o'clock, unless you're the fastest painter in the world or you have a terrible picture of your cat. So I started before, I don't know why it says 3 o'clock, and I finished after 3 o'clock. Well, you definitely started before 3 o'clock if you were painting at 2, and maybe you finished after 3 o'clock. When to use the past continuous. So here's another rule. We use the past continuous for the background of a story. So we often use the past simple for the action. So we talked about the past simple already. So when you're telling a story, you can go back and forth between past continuous and past simple if you're following the proper rules. So if you're giving background of a story, that's when you can use past continuous. And here's an example. The birds were chirping, the butterflies were fluttering about, and the sun was shining. Mr. Attinger sat on the blanket and enjoyed his picnic. So I want to know, where are your examples of past continuous? There they were chirping, were fluttering, and was shining. So all that was going on before Mr. Attinger sat on the blanket, and it continued beyond him on the blanket. And maybe it didn't, but still, it was just showing that this was continuing. It wasn't something that happened and stopped. So for example, Mr. Attinger sat in the blanket. That happened, and once he sat, he didn't, stand up and sit again, stand up and sit again. So, well, maybe he did. Maybe he was uncomfortable and had to keep situating. But what we're saying here is the birds were chirping. The second he sat down, they did not stop chirping. They didn't only chirp as he was sitting down and then stop. The butterflies were fluttering. Can you imagine if the second he sat down, all the butterflies just, boom, stopped fluttering? Or the sun was shining. Second Mr. Attinger sits down, boom, sky goes black. No, it's continuing. So that's why we use the past continuous, because the story we're telling is in the past, but it was continuous. So were chirping, were fluttering, and was shining. All right, when to use the past continuous. rule number 3. So when you have temporary habits or habits that happen more often than we expected in the past. So we often use always, constantly, or forever here. So this thing doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't happen now. So it was the past. So maybe it's a habit you kicked, or it was a habit that was just going on for a little tiny bit. He was always spilling crumbs on the floor when eating chips. So where is the past continuous verb tense here? Was always spilling. Now, always, remember, we tossed that in there. So it really would be was spilling. But in this case, it's kind of a phrase, was always spilling. And what we mean here by temporary habit is maybe we're talking about an adult who we're referring back to when he was a child. So my mother always says how I was always making messes when I was eating. I was always getting food all over my face. Well, obviously, I'm an adult now. I use a napkin, and I tend to stay pretty tidy. So he was always spilling crumbs on the floor when eating chips. Would be a temporary habit that is no longer happening, but it was happening often enough. Here's another one. I was constantly taking awkward selfies when I first got my iPhone. So where is the verb tense used here? Okay, it was constantly taking. And now here we're saying it was kind of a habit that was going on when the iPhone was new. But now that this individual speaking is used to the iPhone, they're not always taking these awkward selfies anymore. Okay, here's another rule when to use past continuous. So you're going to use past continuous to emphasize that something lasted for a while. So this use is often optional, and we usually use it with time expressions like all day or all evening or 4 hours. So let's go ahead and take a look at some examples here. He was resting at home sick all day. So if we look back at that rule, it lasted for a while and it was all day. So obviously, when he was feeling better, he wasn't resting at home anymore. So this is a temporary situation that lasted all day. So where is the past continuous verb or verb phrase here? Yes, it was resting. He was resting at home sick all day. I was reading all morning. Where is the past continuous verb tense here? Yes, was reading. So once the morning ended, the reading ended. It was a temporary thing, but it was for that time period. So there is verb tense part 2. As you notice, we're getting a little more in depth as we go here. So I'll see you later for verb tense part 3.